Alright, let's talk about Canada, that lovely, quiet neighbor to the north, maple syrup, poutine, Ryan Reynolds. We should protect him at all costs. The US-Canada border is the world's longest undefended border. It's a symbol of peace, it's a symbol of friendship, except maybe when it comes to hockey. But what if I told you this peaceful relationship had a very large, very secret asterisk? What if I told you the United States had a detailed plan to invade Canada? Yes, you heard me right, a full-blown, boots-on-the-ground plan. Sorry, but we're taking over your Tim Hortons invasion plan. Sounds like a terrible movie, a bargain bin action flick, but this is not fiction. It was a real plan from Washington, D.C. They sat around tables and looked at maps, seriously discussed conquering the land of the Moose and the Mountie. Not just the War of 1812, American troops did burn parts of what's now Toronto. This plan was updated into the 20th century, cars and airplanes. A shocking piece of history that changes how you see a friendly wave. The idea seems absurd now. America and Canada are like two brothers with a very long driveway. One's louder with fireworks, the other's more polite with better healthcare. The thought of ransacking the other's house is bizarre. Yet the American military planned for it. They identified targets. They calculated troop numbers. They prepared for the use of chemical weapons. A forgotten chapter, terrifying and kind of hilarious. How did this happen? A country that now shares trade agreements and shares pop culture, a different era, a more uncertain world, a tale of paranoia, a tale of military bureaucracy. Sometimes leaders must plan for the absolute worst, even a full-scale war over Halifax. To understand why America would point its military northward, remember one crucial thing. For a long time, Canada wasn't just Canada. It was a part of the British Empire. America's relationship with Britain was complicated. It began with a breakup in 1776. Then came the very messy War of 1812. During that war, the US tried to invade Canada. It failed spectacularly. In return, British forces marched on Washington. Canadian militia joined them. They burned down the White House. That's not something you just forget. It's like the worst family holiday dinner ever, but with cannons. For the next century, the tension remained. The United States saw British North America as a potential staging ground. Imagine a powerful rival owning the giant apartment right above you. So a lot of early American military strategy was based on that fear. The idea was simple. If war with Britain broke out, the first step would be neutralize Canada. It wasn't necessarily about hating Canada itself, but about seeing it as Britain's giant, conveniently located aircraft carrier. This wasn't just paranoia. The British Empire was the world's superpower for a very long time, with a navy that could project power anywhere. The United States, while growing, was still the new kid on the block. American planners worried about conflict over trade. American planners worried about conflict over territory. American planners worried about conflict over influence. Any such war would inevitably involve Canada. The long, porous border that we now celebrate as peace was then seen as a massive vulnerability. A wide-open door through which a British-led army could march. American generals were determined to be the ones doing the marching first. Even after Canada became its own country in 1867, it remained tied to London. Its foreign policy was tied to London, and its military would fight alongside the British. So in the eyes of American planners, an independent Canada still read as Britain Jr. The fundamental strategic problem hadn't changed. If America fought Britain, it would have to fight Canada. And if you have to fight someone, you might as well have a plan for how you're going to win. This lingering distrust set the stage for one of the most secret military plans in American history. So, with all this historical baggage, the American military did what militaries do best. They made a plan. A very, very detailed plan. In the 1920s and 1930s, the US War Department created a series of color-coded war plans: Japan, orange; Germany, black; Mexico, green; British Empire including Canada, red. And the specific plan for invading Canada was officially called WarPlanRed. It was developed in 1930 and was treated with the utmost secrecy. This wasn't some theoretical exercise for students at West Point. This was a living document worked on by top military brass. The main driver behind WarPlanRed was the changing global situation after World War I. Tensions were rising between the United States and Great Britain over naval power and trade. The two were economic rivals, and some in the US military believed a future war was not just possible, but likely. WarPlanRed was therefore designed as a blueprint for a hypothetical war against the entire British Empire. And because Canada was right there, It was slated to be the first and most important battlefield. The plan was to hit Canada so hard and so fast that Britain would be forced to negotiate before it could even send its powerful navy across the Atlantic. The level of secrecy surrounding this plan was immense. For obvious reasons, you don't really want your closest neighbor and trading partner to know. The documents were kept under lock and key, accessible only to a handful of high-ranking officials. The public, and indeed most of the government, had no idea it existed. It's wild to think that while American and Canadian citizens were peacefully crossing the border to visit Niagara Falls, generals in Washington were wargaming how to seize those very same bridges. The plan was only declassified in 1974, shocking historians and the public on both sides of the border. What's truly fascinating is that WarPlanRed wasn't just a defensive measure, it was explicitly an offensive plan. The strategy was based on the idea that the best defense is a good offense. The US would not wait for a British attack. At the first sign of impending war, American forces would launch a massive preemptive invasion of Canada. The goal was to conquer key Canadian industrial centers, ports, and railways to cripple the country's ability to support a British war effort. It was a cold, calculated strategy designed to win a war before it truly began. And Canada was the unfortunate sacrificial pawn. So, what did this grand invasion actually look like on paper? WarPlanRed was incredibly detailed. It wasn't just, step 1, march north. It was a multi-pronged assault designed to overwhelm Canadian defenses from coast to coast. The first and most critical attack was aimed at Halifax, Nova Scotia. Why Halifax? It was Canada's most important Atlantic port, and the primary place where the British Royal Navy would land troops and supplies. The plan called for a massive land and sea assault, including the use of poison gas to quickly subdue the city's defenses. Taking Halifax was considered the key to the entire war. Next up was the industrial heartland of Canada. A huge army group would pour across the border from Buffalo, from Detroit, to seize the Toronto-Hamilton-Niagara region. Toronto, Hamilton, Niagara. This area contained most of Canada's industry, so capturing it would cripple their ability to produce war materials. Another force would move north from Albany, New York to capture Montreal and Quebec City, cutting off the St. Lawrence River and effectively slicing Canada in half. The planners believed controlling this central corridor from Quebec to Ontario would make the rest of the country easier to manage. It was a strategy of decapitation, aimed at Canada's economic and political centers. But the plan didn't stop there. Out west, another invasion was planned. American troops from North Dakota would march north to capture Winnipeg. Winnipeg was a crucial railway hub that connected east and west. Meanwhile, forces from Seattle would push north to capture Vancouver and Victoria. Seizing Canada's Pacific ports would prevent any British naval assistance from that direction. The plan was comprehensive, aiming to conquer every significant strategic point, leaving Canada isolated. The planners even thought about the logistics. They built secret military airfields near the Canadian border in the 1930s, supposedly for civilian use, but perfectly positioned to support an invasion. They conducted spy missions, sending officers on holidays to Canada to discreetly map out roads and survey military installations. They calculated that they would need millions of troops to pull it off. This wasn't a half-baked idea. It was a serious, thoroughly developed military operation, ready to be executed if the order was ever given. The only thing they probably didn't plan for was the sheer politeness of the resistance they might encounter. Now, you might be thinking, was Canada just sitting there, blissfully unaware and unprepared? Not entirely. While they didn't know the specifics of WarPlanRed, Canadian military leaders were not naive. They knew that in any conflict with the United States they would be hopelessly outmatched in terms of population, industry, military size. So in 1921, a brilliant and slightly eccentric Canadian officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Buster Sutherland Brown, came up with his plan, Defense Scheme Number 1. It was audacious, Canada's secret plan to invade the United States. Buster Brown's logic was simple. Canada could never win a defensive war against the US. The American military would just roll over them, so the only hope was a surprise preemptive strike. As soon as war seemed inevitable, small, fast-moving Canadian columns would dash across the border. They wouldn't try to conquer the US. That would be insane. Instead, seize key American cities near the border, Seattle, Minneapolis, Albany. The idea? Buy time. Hold those cities hostage, disrupting the American war machine long enough for Great Britain to send its navy and army to save the day. Defense Scheme Number 1 was filled with bold, almost crazy details. Flying columns of soldiers moving under cover of night launching lightning raids. They would blow up bridges, tear up railway lines, and cause widespread chaos. Buster Brown went on reconnaissance missions, driving through Vermont, driving through New York in his personal car, posing as a tourist, secretly scouting invasion routes. A desperate David versus Goliath plan relying on speed, surprise, and luck. Ultimately, the plan was rejected in 1928 as too risky and politically unfeasible. It was shelved and kept secret for decades. But its existence shows strategic thinking wasn't one-sided, two neighbors smiling across a fence while secretly keeping a plan in the drawer to break into the other's house if things go sour. So, what happened to these elaborate top-secret invasion plans? Thankfully, they ended up exactly where they belong. In the history books. As the 1930s wore on, the world changed. Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, the United States, the British Empire, including Canada. By the time World War II broke out, the idea of them fighting each other seemed absurd. WarPlanRed was quietly put away, its purpose made obsolete. The two nations became the closest of allies, fighting side by side. WarPlanRed, Defense Scheme Number 1. Today, the US-Canada border is a model of international cooperation. They share integrated commands, like NORAD. The idea of a war between them is now the stuff of comedy. This forgotten history highlights the journey from potential enemies to inseparable friends, shared values, mutual respect, and a common threat that pushed them together. So why are we still fascinated by these old war plans? It's a peek into an alternate reality, a what-if that's almost too strange to believe. Like discovering your friendly, mild-mannered grandpa had a secret plan to get into a bar fight with his best friend. It's so out of character that it's captivating. The story has all the elements of a spy thriller. Secrecy, daring plans, and high stakes. But it's also a historical curiosity that reminds us history is weirder and more complex than we think. In the end, WarPlanRed is more than a funny anecdote. It's a lesson in how international relations evolve. It proves that even when nations prepare for the worst, they can end up building for the best. The United States and Canada chose partnership, turning a potential battlefield into the world's most peaceful border. And that is a much better outcome than a war over Winnipeg. It's a relationship we should never take for granted, because once the alternative was very real and very secret.